The rifle barrel pressed cold against Corbin Westfield's temple as three men surrounded his kitchen table. The marriage contract crumpled in the lead gunman's fist. "You got 30 days to find yourself a bride, Westfield, or this here ranch becomes property of the Cattlemen's Association." The man's tobacco-stained teeth gleamed in the lamplight. Ain't no unmarried woman left in 3 counties willing to tie herself to a broke rancher with debts. Corbin's jaw tightened, his weathered hands remaining steady on the table despite the weapon aimed at his skull. At 35, he'd survived Apache raids, cattle rustlers, and his beloved wife Melody's death from consumption 2 winters past. But the new territorial law demanding married landowners was strangling him like a noose. "Get off my property," he growled, his voice carrying the authority of a man who'd built this spread from nothing. The gunman laughed, backing toward the door. 30 days, Westfield, clock's ticking. As their horses thundered away, Corbin slumped in his chair, staring at the legal document that might as well have been his death warrant. The Territorial Marriage Act of 1885 required all property owners to be married or forfeit their holdings to the association, a corrupt scheme designed to consolidate land under wealthy cattle barons. A soft clearing of throat made him spin around. Paisley Monroe stood in the doorway connecting to the small servants' quarters, her indentured papers clutched in trembling fingers. At 23, she possessed uncommon beauty despite her worn calico dress and the exhaustion etched around her green eyes. Her auburn hair, usually pinned severely back, had come loose during her eavesdropping. "Mr. Westfield," she whispered, her Irish accent still thick after 3 years in Colorado territory. "I heard what them men said." Corbin's chest constricted. Paisley had come with the ranch when he'd purchased it from old Fletcher Monroe, her distant uncle who'd sold her indentured contract along with the livestock. She worked 18-hour days cooking, cleaning, and tending the vegetable garden, bound to 7 years of servitude to pay off debts she'd never incurred. "This ain't your concern, girl." "But it is." She stepped forward, candlelight dancing across her determined features. "You lose this ranch, I get sold to whoever buys it. Could be them association men, could be worse." The truth of her words hit him like a physical blow. Under territorial law, indentured servants transferred with property ownership. If the Cattlemen's Association seized his ranch, Paisley would become their property, and men like them had dark appetites for young women with no legal protections. "There's got to be unmarried women somewhere," Corbin muttered, though he knew it was hopeless. The drought had driven most families to California, and those who remained had daughters already wed, or too young. Paisley's bare feet whispered across the wooden floor as she approached the table. "There's me," his head snapped up, meeting her steady gaze. "You're indentured. Can't legally marry without your contract holder's permission." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "You're my contract holder, Mr. Westfield. Give yourself permission." The audacity of it stole his breath. Marriage to his own servant, it was scandalous, desperate, and possibly their only salvation. Dawn painted the Colorado sky blood red as Corbin paced the front porch, Paisley's proposal echoing in his mind. Marriage of convenience wasn't uncommon on the frontier, but wedding his own indentured servant crossed lines that decent society wouldn't tolerate. Yet decent society had abandoned them to vultures circling overhead. Through the kitchen window, he watched Paisley kneading bread dough with fierce concentration, her sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms strengthened by years of labor. She'd said nothing more after her shocking suggestion, simply returned to her quarters as if she hadn't just offered to chain herself to him legally as well as contractually. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made his hand drift to his Colt, but instead of association thugs, Sheriff Dalton Rourke rode up alone, his weathered face grim beneath his battered hat. "Morning, Corbin." Dalton dismounted, his spurs jingling against the porch steps. "Heard you had visitors last night." News travels fast. Bad news always does. The sheriff accepted the cup of coffee Paisley appeared with, nodding his thanks. "The association's moving faster than expected. They're not waiting for the full 30 days filing seizure papers this morning based on some trumped-up tax liens." Corbin's blood turned to ice. That's illegal. Legal enough when Judge Morrison's in their pocket. Dalton's eyes flicked meaningfully toward Paisley, who lingered near the door. "Unless you got a miracle up your sleeve, they'll have deputies here by week's end." After the sheriff departed with promises to stall as long as possible, Corbin found himself alone with Paisley in the kitchen. She worked in silence, her movements graceful despite the tremor in her hands that betrayed her fear. "I know what you're thinking," she said, without looking up from the stew she was stirring, "that it's madness to wed a servant girl. That people will talk. People can go to hell." The vehemence in his voice surprised them both. "It's not about that." She turned, wooden spoon dripping in her grasp. Then what? How could he explain the guilt that ate at him nightly? That he'd failed to protect Melody from the consumption that claimed her, failed to provide the medicine that might have saved her life? That marrying another woman even for survival felt like betraying her memory? "You deserve better than a marriage of convenience to a man still haunted by his dead wife." Paisley set down the spoon, her green eyes flashing with something he'd never seen before, not subservience, but steel. "And what do I deserve when the association takes over? You think they'll treat me with kindness? Respect my virtue?" Her words conjured images that made his hands clench into fists. Stories traveled the territory about what happened to unprotected women under association control. They called it breaking in the help. "I've been property for 3 years, Paisley continued, moving closer. "Bought, sold, and worked like livestock. At least as your wife, I'd have legal rights. A name that means something." "And what about love?" The question escaped before he could stop it. A sad smile crossed her features. "Love's a luxury for people who ain't fighting to survive, Mr. Westfield. Maybe someday we'll have that luxury. Maybe we won't. But dead people don't fall in love." That evening, they sat across from each other at the worn kitchen table where he'd signed her indentured papers 3 years ago. Now a different document lay between them, a marriage application Dalton had quietly procured from the territorial office. "Once we do this, there's no going back," Corbin warned. "You'd be legally bound to me as wife, not servant. It changes everything." Paisley picked up the pen with steady fingers. "Everything's already changed. The moment them association men rode onto your land." She paused, meeting his gaze. "I'm not asking for love, Corbin Westfield. I'm asking for a chance to live." His name on her lips instead of Mr. Westfield sent an unexpected jolt through him. When she signed her name in careful script beside his, sealing their unlikely alliance, he couldn't shake the feeling they were signing more than a legal document. They were signing a pact that would alter the very foundations of their world. The wedding ceremony took place at Don and Sheriff Rourke's parlor, with only the lawman and his wife Martha as witnesses. Paisley wore Melody's blue dress, a concession Corbin offered when he saw her standing in the kitchen wearing the same worn calico she'd labored in for 3 years. The sight of another woman in his late wife's clothing should have gutted him. But instead he felt an unexpected sense of rightness, as if Melody herself had blessed this desperate union. "Do you, Corbin James Westfield, take Paisley Catherine Monroe to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Judge Morrison's replacement, a circuit preacher named Reverend Hayes, spoke the words with genuine warmth despite the unusual circumstances. "I do." The words came easier than expected when Paisley repeated her vows in that lilting Irish accent. Her voice strong despite her trembling hands, something shifted in Corbin's chest. This wasn't just a business arrangement anymore. It was a promise between two souls bound by necessity, but strengthened by mutual respect. The kiss that sealed their marriage was brief, chaste, but when their lips met, Corbin felt the first spark of something beyond mere survival. Paisley's eyes widened as if she felt it too, before she quickly lowered her gaze. "Congratulations, Mrs. Westfield," Martha Rourke beamed, embracing the new bride. "Now let's get you both home before the association realizes what you've done." The ride back to the ranch passed in charged silence. Paisley sat beside Corbin on the wagon seat, no longer separated by the invisible barriers that had defined their relationship for 3 years. When he helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingered at her waist and she didn't pull away. "I'll sleep in the barn," Corbin announced as they entered the house. "Give you privacy to settle into the main bedroom." Paisley stopped in the kitchen doorway. "That's your room, your wife's bed." "Paisley, Mrs. Westfield," she corrected gently. "We agreed this was real, even if it started practical. Real wives don't banish their husbands to the barn." Heat crawled up his neck. "This isn't about wanting you." The lie died as her eyebrows rose. The truth was, he'd been fighting an unwelcome attraction to his servant girl for months before this crisis forced their hands. "I know the difference between wanting and needing, Corbin." Her use of his first name still sent electricity through him. "Right now, we need each other." The wanting ... double quotes, she blushed prettily. "Well, that's something married folks figure out together." Before he could respond, thundering hoofbeats announced unwelcome visitors. Through the window, they saw a dozen association riders surrounding the house, led by the same man who'd threatened Corbin 3 days earlier, Westfield. The leader's voice boomed across the yard. "Come out here. We know your little scheme won't hold up in court." Corbin reached for his rifle, but Paisley caught his arm. "No, we do this legal-like." She squared her shoulders, every inch the rancher's wife despite wearing a borrowed dress. "They want to see a marriage. We show them a marriage. Together." They walked onto the porch. Corbin's arm settled naturally around Paisley's waist, and she leaned into his side with convincing affection. "Gentlemen," Corbin called out, his voice carrying across the yard, "I'd like you to meet my wife, Mrs. Paisley Westfield." The leader's face twisted with rage. "That's your damn cook girl. You can't marry your own property." "Former cook girl," Paisley corrected, her Irish accent giving her words a musical defiance. "And I was never his property. I was under contract, which my husband legally terminated upon our marriage yesterday morning." She held up their marriage certificate, the official seal gleaming in the morning sun. "This is fraud," the man sputtered. "This is marriage." Sheriff Rourke's voice cut through the tension as he rode up with 2 deputies. "Legal, binding, and properly witnessed. You boys best move along before I arrest you for trespassing." As the association riders retreated with promises that this ain't over, Corbin felt Paisley's body trembling against his side. But when he looked down, he realized it wasn't fear making her shake. It was barely contained laughter. "Did you see his face?" she whispered, like he'd swallowed a hornet. Her joy was infectious, and for the first time since Melody's death, Corbin found himself genuinely smiling. Maybe this marriage had started as desperation, but standing here with his wife, facing down their enemies together, it felt like something much more powerful than mere survival. 3 weeks into their marriage, the fragile balance between Corbin and Paisley began shifting like sand beneath their feet. She'd moved into the main bedroom but insisted on keeping to one side of the large bed, with Corbin respecting the invisible boundary between them. During the day, they worked the ranch as partners rather than master and servant, but evenings brought a tension neither knew how to navigate. The crisis arrived with the October roundup. Corbin discovered nearly 50 head of cattle missing from The south pasture stolen in the night by association. Men who left clear tracks leading toward their stronghold in Devil's Canyon. It was a direct challenge. Recover the cattle and risk a range war, or let them go and appear weak before the territorial government's inspection next month. We can't let them steal from us, Paisley declared, loading shells into the Winchester with practiced efficiency. Every rancher in the territory is watching to see if we'll fight or fold. Corbin stared at his wife in amazement. 3 weeks ago, she'd been afraid to speak above a whisper in his presence. Now she was discussing military strategy with the confidence of a general. This isn't your fight, Paisley. You didn't sign up for a range war. Her green eyes flashed dangerously. I signed up to be your wife, Corbin Westfield. That means your fights are my fights. Your enemies are my enemies. She stepped closer, close enough that he could smell the lavender soap she'd started using since moving into the main house. Or, did you think marrying me meant keeping me locked away like some helpless ornament? The accusation stung because it held truth. Despite their legal partnership, he'd continued treating her like something precious and fragile, perhaps because acknowledging her strength meant acknowledging how much he'd grown to need her. You could be killed, he said roughly. So could you. Then where would that leave me? She touched his cheek with calloused fingers, the first truly intimate gesture she'd initiated since their wedding. We survive this together, or we don't survive it at all. They rode out at midnight with Sheriff Rourke and 3 trusted ranch hands, following the cattle trail through moonlit canyons toward the association's temporary camp. Paisley rode beside Corbin, her rifle across her saddle and her hair braided back for battle. Watching her navigate the treacherous terrain with skill that rivaled any cowboy, Corbin realized he'd fallen in love with his wife. Somewhere between her declaration of war and this moment of riding into danger together, the association had camped in a box canyon, confident in their isolation and superior numbers. But they hadn't counted on Paisley's knowledge of the terrain gained during her uncle's ownership of the ranch, or her tactical mind that spotted weaknesses in their defensive positions. 15 men around the fire, maybe 6 more on watch, she whispered, studying the camp through Corbin's field glasses. But they've left the North Ridge unguarded because they think it's impassable. It is impassable, Rourke muttered. Paisley smiled grimly. Not if you know the old mining trail. Uncle Fletcher used to smuggle whiskey through there during the territorial tax troubles. Her plan was audacious. While Corbin and the others created a distraction at the canyon mouth, Paisley would lead 2 men up the supposedly impassable ridge to scatter the stolen cattle and drive them toward freedom. It was dangerous, requiring perfect timing and nerves of steel. Absolutely not, Corbin declared. You're not going up there alone. I'm not alone. Jake and Tommy are coming with me. She checked her weapons with calm efficiency. And I'm the only one who knows the trail well enough to navigate it in darkness. Before he could argue further, she kissed him, not the chaste peck of their wedding, but a real kiss full of passion and promise and desperate hope. When she pulled away, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. Don't you dare die on me, Corbin Westfield. I just figured out I love you, and I'll be mighty annoyed if you go and get yourself killed before I can properly tell you. The confession hit him like lightning, illuminating everything he'd been too stubborn or scared to acknowledge. Paisley, tell me after we get our cattle back, she interrupted, swinging into her saddle. Right now, we've got work to do. As she disappeared into the darkness with Jake and Tommy, Corbin felt his heart riding with her up that treacherous ridge. 3 weeks ago, she'd been his desperate solution to a legal problem. Tonight, she was his partner in every sense that mattered, and he was terrified of losing her. Before their story had truly begun, the battle for Devil's Canyon lasted 3 hours and changed everything between Corbin and Paisley forever. Her daring plan worked flawlessly. The stolen cattle thundered down from the supposedly impassable ridge, while Corbin's diversionary attack drew the association men into a crossfire that sent them fleeing into the night. Not a single shot was fired at a human being, but the message rang clear across the territory. The Westfields would not be intimidated. As dawn broke over the recovered herd, Paisley emerged from the canyon dust-covered and triumphant, her rifle still smoking from the warning shots she'd fired over the rustlers' heads. The sight of her wild-haired and fierce, every inch the warrior queen made Corbin's chest swell with pride and desire in equal measure. 53 had recovered, she reported, dismounting with the grace of a born rider. Plus, we found 6 more bearing other ranchers' brands. Seems the association's been busy. Sheriff Rourke whistled low. This evidence will shut down their operation permanently. You two just saved every small rancher in 3 counties. But Corbin only had eyes for his wife. When their gazes met across the milling cattle, something electric passed between them, acknowledgement of shared danger survived, mutual respect earned, and love freely confessed under starlight. The ride home passed in charged silence. Jake and Tommy drove the recovered cattle while Corbin and Paisley rode side by side, the space between their horses growing smaller with each mile. When they finally crested the hill overlooking their ranch, Paisley pulled up her horse. It looks different now, she said softly. What does? Home. She turned to face him fully. 3 weeks ago, this was your place, and I was just working here. Now it's ours. The simple word ours nearly undid him. Paisley, about what you said back. There, that I love you? Her directness still caught him off guard. I meant it. Somewhere between you treating me like a partner instead of property and watching you risk everything to protect what's ours, I fell completely, utterly in love with my husband. Corbin dismounted and helped her down from her horse, his hands lingering at her waist as they stood face to face in the morning light. I love you too, he said, the words coming easier than he'd expected. Don't know exactly when it happened, but somewhere between your wedding day courage and tonight's battle plan, you stopped being my convenient solution and became my heart. When he kissed her this time, it was with the passion of a man claiming his true wife, and she responded with equal fervor. 3 weeks of careful boundaries and polite distance evaporated as they finally acknowledged what had been building between them since the moment she'd offered to save them both. Take me home, husband, she whispered against his lips. They left the horses with Jake and walked to the house hand in hand, suddenly shy despite their bold confessions. In the kitchen where their unlikely partnership had begun, Paisley turned to face him. I need to tell you something, she said, her cheeks flushed pink. About my indentured contract. Corbin's blood chilled. Had the association found some legal loophole to challenge their marriage? Uncle Fletcher didn't sell me to pay his debts, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. He sold me because I refused to marry his business partner, a man who wanted to use me as collateral for a gambling debt. Fletcher forged the paperwork, made it look like I owed money to justify the indenture. The revelation hit Corbin like a physical blow. You've been enslaved for 3 years based on fraud? I knew you were different when you bought me sight unseen and then actually paid me wages even though you weren't legally required to. Tears sparkled in her eyes. Most men who purchase servant girls expect ... other services. Rage filled Corbin at the thought of what she'd endured, what she'd feared might happen. But beneath the anger was overwhelming gratitude that fate had brought her to his ranch instead of some other man's. You're free now, he said fiercely. Free and loved and protected for as long as I draw breath. I know. She smiled through her tears. That's why I can choose to stay. Not because I'm bound by law or contract or necessity, but because I choose you, Corbin Westfield. I choose this life we're building together. When she led him toward their bedroom, truly their bedroom, Now the morning sun streaming through the windows blessed their union with golden light. They had survived legal threats and cattle rustlers and their own stubborn hearts. What had begun as a desperate marriage of convenience had transformed into something neither had dared hope for, a partnership built on mutual respect, seasoned with shared danger, and blessed with the kind of love that could weather any storm the harsh frontier might send their way. Winter arrived early that year, blanketing the Westfield ranch in snow that sparkled like diamonds under the December sun. Inside their warm kitchen, Paisley hummed Irish lullabies while kneading bread, her movements graceful despite the growing roundness of her belly. Their child, conceived during those passionate October nights following the cattle raid, would arrive with the spring thaw. Corbin paused in repairing harnesses to watch his wife work, still amazed by the transformation in their lives. The scared servant girl who'd once flinched at his approach had become a confident ranch owner who handled legal documents with the territorial government and negotiated feed prices with neighboring spreads. More importantly, she'd become the woman who shared his bed, his dreams, and now carried his child. "You're staring again," Paisley said without turning around, but he could hear the smile in her voice. "Can't help it. You're beautiful." She laughed, the sound warming the kitchen better than any fire. "I'm round as a Christmas pudding and covered in flour dust." "Beautiful," he repeated firmly, rising to wrap his arms around her from behind. His hand settled over their growing child, and he felt the familiar miracle of movement beneath his palms. "Active little one," Paisley murmured, leaning back against his chest. "Takes after his father, I think. His or hers?" She turned in his arms, flour dusting his shirt. "Either way, this child will know they're wanted, loved, and free." The word "free" still carried special weight between them. Last month, they'd received word that Uncle Fletcher had been arrested for contract fraud, along with 6 other men who'd been selling false indentures to unsuspecting families. Paisley's testimony had helped convict them all, finally bringing justice for crimes that had destroyed countless lives. Their conversation was interrupted by approaching riders, not the thundering approach of enemies, but the steady pace of friends. Sheriff Rourke and his wife Martha arrived with news that would change everything once again. Territorial governors appointed Corbin as district cattle commissioner. Rourke announced, accepting coffee and Paisley's fresh bread. "Congratulations, Commissioner Westfield." Paisley's face lit with pride, but Corbin felt his stomach drop. "I can't leave the ranch. Not with the baby coming." "You don't have to leave," Martha explained. "The territory's establishing regional offices. Yours would be right here, covering 5 counties. You'd be the law for cattle disputes, brand registration, and range management." It was an honor that would secure their future and their children's inheritance, but it also meant responsibility for protecting every small rancher from the kind of corruption they'd fought against. "What about the association?" Paisley asked. "Won't they fight the appointment?" Rourke's grin turned predatory. "Hard to fight anything from federal prison. Your cattle raid evidence led to racketeering charges. Judge Morrison's awaiting trial for bribery, and the whole operation's been disbanded." That evening, Corbin and Paisley sat before their fireplace, her head on his shoulder as they watched snow fall outside their windows. The house they'd saved from the association now served as unofficial headquarters for honest ranchers throughout the region. "Scared?" Paisley asked, her hand resting on her belly. "Terrified," he admitted. "What if I'm not good enough? What if I fail the people counting on us?" She lifted her head to meet his gaze. "Remember what you told me the night we decided to fight for our cattle? We survive this together, or we don't survive it at all. That was your line, was it?" She smiled. "Seems like something we both would say." 3 days later, Corbin officially accepted the commissioner position in a ceremony held in their own parlor. with Paisley proudly pinning the territorial badge to his vest. Representatives from dozen ranches attended, along with their wives and children, evidence of the community they'd helped build through their willingness to fight corruption. As the celebration wound down, Paisley found herself on the front porch, watching the stars emerge in the clear winter sky. Martha Rourke joined her, both women wrapped in warm shawls against the cold. "Happy?" Martha asked. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Paisley replied honestly. "Sometimes I think about that scared girl who offered to marry her master to keep from being sold to worse men. She couldn't have imagined this, being loved, respected, building something meaningful alongside her husband. And now?" Paisley smiled, her hand caressing the child who would be born free in a territory made safer by their parents' courage. "Now I think anything's possible when two people decide to fight for each other instead of just surviving." Inside the house, Corbin's laughter boomed as he shared stories with fellow ranchers who'd become friends and allies. This was what they built together, not just a marriage, but a community. Not just survival, but prosperity earned through integrity and mutual support. The woman who'd once been considered property now owned half of everything she surveyed, and more importantly, had earned the respect of everyone who knew her story. It was a transformation that proved love and partnership could overcome any obstacle frontier life might create. Spring arrived with their daughter's first cry, echoing through the ranch house at dawn on April 15, 1886. Corbin held the tiny, perfect girl while Paisley recovered, both parents awed by the miracle they'd created together. They named her Grace Melody Westfield, Grace for the blessing she represented, Melody to honor the wife whose memory had finally found peace. "She has your eyes," Corbin whispered, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks as he placed their daughter in Paisley's arms. "And your stubborn chin," Paisley laughed weakly, exhausted but radiant. "She'd be a force to reckon with." Dr. Henderson, summoned from town for the delivery, cleaned his instruments while beaming at the new family. "Healthiest baby I've delivered all year. You've got good stock here, Commissioner." Over the following weeks, visitors streamed to the ranch to meet the newest Westfield. Grace became the darling of the community they'd built, passed from hand to hand among rancher families who'd found prosperity and security under Corbin's fair leadership as cattle commissioner. But the most meaningful visit came from an unexpected source. Melody's sister Catherine arrived from St. Louis, drawn by news of Corbin's remarriage and the birth of his daughter. Paisley had dreaded this moment, fearing condemnation from her predecessor's family. Instead, Catherine embraced both Paisley and baby Grace with tears of joy. "Melody appeared to me in a dream last winter," she confessed over dinner. "She was smiling, completely at peace. She told me she'd sent you the perfect woman to love Corbin and give him the family he deserved." Paisley felt her own tears beginning. "I've always feared I was betraying her memory." "Oh, my dear girl." Catherine took Paisley's hands in hers. Melody's greatest regret was leaving Corbin alone. She would be so grateful to know he found love again, especially with someone as worthy as you've proven yourself to be. That evening, Corbin and Paisley walked through their property, Grace sleeping in her father's arms while they surveyed the empire they'd built together. The ranch had expanded to include 3,000 acres, with plans for a proper town nearby. Corbin's commissioner duties had brought law and order to a previously lawless region, while Paisley's business acumen had made them wealthy through careful investments and partnerships. "Remember when you thought I was crazy for proposing marriage?" Paisley asked, slipping her arm around her husband's waist. "I thought you were desperate," he corrected. "Turns out you were brilliant." They paused at the hilltop cemetery where Melody rested under a carefully tended headstone. Corbin knelt to place fresh wildflowers on the grave, Grace gurgling contentedly in his arms. "Thank you," he whispered to his first wife, "for everything you taught me about love and for sending me someone brave enough to save us all." Paisley knelt beside him, adding her own flowers to the tribute. "I'll take good care of him," she promised, "and I'll make sure Grace knows about the wonderful woman who came before us." As they rose to leave, a gentle breeze stirred the wildflowers almost like a blessing from beyond. Walking back toward their house, Corbin reflected on the journey that had brought them here. What began as a desperate legal maneuver had become the greatest love story of his life. 5 years later, the Westfield Ranch hosted the Territorial Capital's first annual Cattlemen's Ball, with Commissioner Corbin and his wife welcoming guests from across the region. Grace, now a spirited 5-year-old, charmed visitors, while her infant brother James, born the previous summer, slept peacefully in his mother's arms. As the evening wound down, Corbin and Paisley found themselves alone on their front porch, watching the stars emerge over land they'd fought to keep and love they'd dared to trust. "Any regrets?" Corbin asked, the same question he'd posed on their wedding night. Paisley smiled, the same radiant expression that had captured his heart during their most desperate hour. "Only one that we wasted 3 years being too stubborn to admit we belonged together from the start. We weren't ready then," he replied wisely. "Had to earn each other first." Their children's laughter drifted from inside the house, where Grace was entertaining her younger brother with dramatic retellings of their parents' courtship, suitably edited for young ears but capturing the essential truth of two souls who'd found each other when they needed it most. What had begun with a woman offering herself as property to save them, both had become the foundation of a family, a community, and a legacy that would endure for generations. In the end, their desperate gamble had proven the most natural thing in the world, two hearts recognizing their perfect match. Even when disguised as a business arrangement, love, as Paisley had learned, was indeed a luxury. But some luxuries, once earned, became necessities that transformed everything they touched into something beautiful, lasting, and free.